Chapter V6, Historical Precedent and Temporal Scale, the Galileo Paradigm and its Modern Implementation. The systematic suppression of scientific innovation by institutional gatekeepers represents one of history's most persistent and damaging crimes against human civilization. The specific mechanisms employed by modern scientific confidence artists can be understood as direct continuations of the institutional fraud that condemned Galileo to house arrest and delayed the acceptance of heliocentric astronomy for centuries. The comparison is not rhetorical, but forensic, where the same psychological, economic, and social dynamics that protected geocentric astronomy continue to operate in contemporary scientific institutions with measurably greater impact due to modern communication technologies and global institutional reach. When Galileo presented telescopic evidence for the Copernican model in 1610, the institutional response followed patterns that remain identical in contemporary scientific discourse. Firstly, credentialism dismissal, where the Aristotelian philosophers at the University of Padua refused to look through Galileo's telescope, arguing that their theoretical training made empirical observation unnecessary. Cardinal Bellarmine, the leading theological authority of the period, declared that observational evidence was irrelevant because established doctrine had already resolved cosmological questions through authorized interpretation of Scripture and Aristotelian texts. Secondly, consensus enforcement, where the Inquisition's condemnation of Galileo was justified not through engagement with his evidence, but through appeals to institutional unanimity. The 1633 trial record shows that Galileo's judges repeatedly cited the fact that all Christian philosophers and the universal church agreed on geocentric cosmology. Individual examination of evidence was explicitly rejected as inappropriate because it implied doubt about collective wisdom. Thirdly, systematic exclusion, where Galileo's works were placed on the index of forbidden books, his students were prevented from holding academic positions, and researchers who supported heliocentric models faced career destruction and social isolation. The institutional message was clear. Scientific careers depended on conformity to established paradigms, regardless of empirical evidence. The psychological and economic mechanisms underlying this suppression are identical to those operating in contemporary scientific institutions. The Aristotelian professors who refused to use Galileo's telescope were protecting not just theoretical commitments, but economic interests. Their university positions, consulting fees, and social status depended entirely on maintaining the authority of established doctrine. Acknowledging Galileo's evidence would have required admitting that centuries of their teaching had been fundamentally wrong, destroying their credibility and livelihood. The temporal consequences of this institutional fraud extended far beyond the immediate suppression of heliocentric astronomy. The delayed acceptance of Copernican cosmology retarded the development of accurate navigation, chronometry, and celestial mechanics for over a century. Maritime exploration was hampered by incorrect models of planetary motion, resulting in navigational errors that cost thousands of lives and delayed global communication and trade. Medical progress was similarly impacted because geocentric models reinforced humoral theories that prevented understanding of circulation, respiration, and disease transmission. Most significantly, the suppression of Galileo established a cultural precedent that institutional authority could override empirical evidence through credentialism enforcement and consensus manipulation. This precedent became embedded in educational systems, religious doctrine, and political governance, creating generations of citizens trained to defer to institutional interpretation rather than evaluate evidence independently. The damage extended across centuries and continents, shaping social attitudes toward authority, truth, and the legitimacy of individual reasoning. The modern implementation of this suppression system operates through mechanisms that are structurally identical, but vastly more sophisticated and far-reaching than their historical predecessors. When Neil deGrasse Tyson dismisses challenges to cosmological orthodoxy through credentialism assertions, he is employing the same psychological tactics used by Cardinal Bellarmine to silence Galileo. The specific language has evolved. "I'm a scientist and you're not," replaces "the church has spoken," but the logical structure remains identical. institutional authority supersedes empirical evidence, and individual evaluation of data is illegitimate without proper credentials. The consensus enforcement mechanisms have similarly expanded in scope and sophistication. Where the Inquisition could suppress Galileo's ideas within Catholic territories, modern scientific institutions operate globally through coordinated funding agencies, publication systems, and media networks. When researchers propose alternatives to dark matter, challenge the standard model of particle physics, or question established cosmological parameters, they face systematic exclusion from academic positions, research funding, and publication opportunities across the entire international scientific community. The career destruction protocols have become more subtle but equally effective. Rather than public trial and house arrest, dissenting scientists face citation boycotts, conference exclusion, and administrative marginalization that effectively ends their research careers while maintaining the appearance of objective peer review. The psychological impact is identical. Other researchers learn to avoid controversial positions that might threaten their professional survival. Brian Cox's response to challenges regarding supersymmetry provides a perfect contemporary parallel to the Galileo suppression. When the Large Hadron Collider consistently failed to detect supersymmetric particles, Cox did not acknowledge the predictive failure or engage with alternative models. Instead, he deployed the same consensus dismissal used against Galileo by stating, "Every physicist in the world accepts supersymmetry. Alternative models are promoted only by those who don't understand the mathematics, and proper scientific discourse requires institutional credentials rather than empirical evidence." The temporal consequences of this modern suppression system are measurably greater than those of the Galileo era due to the global reach of contemporary institutions and the accelerated pace of potential technological development. Where Galileo's suppression delayed astronomical progress within European territories for decades, the modern gatekeeping system operates across all continents simultaneously, preventing alternative paradigms from emerging anywhere in the global scientific community. The compound temporal damage is exponentially greater because contemporary suppression prevents not just individual discoveries, but entire technological civilizations that could have emerged from alternative scientific frameworks. The systematic exclusion of plasma cosmology, electric universe theories, and alternative models of gravitation has foreclosed research directions that might have yielded breakthrough technologies in energy generation, space propulsion, and materials science. Unlike the Galileo suppression, which delayed known theoretical possibilities, modern gatekeeping prevents the emergence of unknown possibilities, creating an indefinite expansion of civilizational opportunity cost. Michio Kaku's systematic promotion of speculative string theory while ignoring empirically grounded alternatives demonstrates this temporal crime in operation. His media authority ensures that public scientific interest and educational resources are channeled toward unfalsifiable theoretical constructs rather than testable alternative models. The opportunity cost is measurable. Generations of students are trained in theoretical frameworks that have produced no technological applications or empirical discoveries, while potentially revolutionary approaches remain unfunded and unexplored. The psychological conditioning effects of modern scientific gatekeeping extend far beyond the Galileo precedent in both scope and permanence. Where the Inquisition's suppression was geographically limited and eventually reversed, contemporary media authority creates global populations trained in intellectual submission that persists across multiple generations. The spectacle science communication pioneered by Tyson, Cox, and Kaku reaches audiences in the hundreds of millions, creating unprecedented scales of cognitive conditioning that render entire populations incapable of independent scientific reasoning. This represents a qualitative expansion of the historical crime. Previous generations of gatekeepers suppressed specific discoveries. Modern confidence con artists systematically destroy the cognitive capacity for discovery itself. The temporal implications are correspondingly greater because the damage becomes self-perpetuating across indefinite time horizons, creating civilizational trajectories that preclude scientific renaissance through internal reform.